What is evolution?
Small changing of every species on Earth over time.
How apes eventually turned into what we are now.
Progressing from one state to a more advanced state.
Monkeys to man, dog.
When genetic mutations accumulate over time.
Things change and they become better and more adapted to the environment.
We've all heard of evolution. It has something to do with the human descent from monkey, some changes over time, and there was this bearded dude with finches called Darwin. But what exactly is evolution? How does it work? And how did it make us who we are today? Answers to these and other questions in today's episode of The Curiosity Show. Evolution is the process of gradual changes in a population over time. It explains why species change, gain new traits, and become so perfectly adapted to their environment. So, evolution is the change of species. But where do these changes come from?
They're random and they come from our DNA, our chromosomes.
Environmental changes.
I think it's just chance. Like, it happens and the genetic mutations are like minuscule and then can increase over time.
I guess they changed because of environment.
First, we have to understand what determines our traits. Traits, so things like appearance, strength, metabolism, and every other characteristic of the body. The answer is genes and proteins. Proteins are responsible for all the machinery inside our cells. They are constantly making, moving, and changing various molecules. They decide how the organism works. Proteins are built based on genes, instructions encoded in our DNA. Gene codes for a given protein, and the protein determines a trait. Here is the shape of ears. This process usually works great, but sometimes DNA randomly changes or gets damaged. It can be triggered by toxins, radiation, or even viruses. DNA can also randomly change due to a copying error when the cell replicates. Such random changes in DNA are called mutations. Most of them are neutral. They don't affect the organism in any way, and often we can't even see them. Some are negative. They often break the protein or make it worse, resulting in defects or causing death. But sometimes mutations can be positive, resulting in a new, better protein and a new, better trait. These positive mutations are crucial for the evolution because they introduce changes never seen before. Okay, now we know how mutations arise, but how are they passed to the next generation? You see, not all mutations are passed on. For example, if one of your skin cells mutates, you might get a skin cancer, but it won't be passed on to your kids. The only way for a mutation to be passed on is to be located in gametes, so either sperm or egg cell. When your gametes are produced, your DNA is shuffled and each gamete takes a randomized half of it. This process is called recombination, and it produces thousands of different DNA combinations and many unique gametes. Some gametes will have mutations, others won't. It's random. Then the gametes have a chance to connect in the process of insemination. If a gamete with a mutation connects and creates a zygote, the zygote will later develop into a new organism with that mutation. The mutation has been passed on to the next generation. It's important to remember that a single mutation is usually not so dramatic. It's rather a modification than a complete revolution. Then every next generation is only slightly different from the previous one, the same way you are just slightly different from your parents. However, over a long period of time and many generations, these small changes accumulate and cause significant changes, even resulting in a completely new species. We call this process descent with modification, and it's the driving force of evolution. To recap, mutations are random. Recombination produces randomized DNA sets, and then gametes connect partially by chance and produce unique offspring every single time. But wait a minute, if everything is so random, how is it possible that only positive mutations survive in the population and all of the organisms become so perfectly adapted to their environment? Is it all just pure luck? You see, every organism produces a lot of offspring, way more than would be needed for just the survival of the species. All offspring are slightly different, with a unique set of DNA from both parents. On top of that, some offspring will inherit mutations and new traits, others won't. This diversity is the best strategy against the second driving force of evolution, natural selection. But how does natural selection actually work?
And the environment changes, and those that don't change die.
Traits that are more likely to help an animal survive means they're more likely to reproduce, and so then they're more likely to pass those traits on to their offspring.
If you don't adapt, you won't survive, and then your whole species is gone.
More adapted organisms have higher fitness, meaning they can survive and reproduce better. Less adapted organisms die, often before they can even reproduce. Because of that, every next generation is better and more adapted to the environment. However, it's important to remember that a given mutation or trait is not necessarily good or bad on its own. It all depends on the context and the environment. Let's take this fox for example. Due to mutations and recombination, a grey fox will produce many unique offspring, all slightly different in color. In the Arctics with a lot of snow, a brighter fox will camouflage better. Because of that, it will get more food and reproduce more. Other colors are less effective and will reproduce less or die. Over time, foxes in this population will become brighter because being bright provides higher fitness. On the other hand, if the same offspring were in a forest, a darker brown fox would camouflage better. Because of that, it would get more food and reproduce better. Other colors are less effective, and over time, there will be more and more brown foxes in the population. Color is just one trait, but every organism has many traits and many unique mutations. Both populations change over time, and after many generations, the white fox and the brown fox are so different that they are not able to mate. They became two separate species. The grey fox was the common ancestor, but it wasn't perfectly suited to any of the environments. That's the case for most species on the planet. Before an adapted species form, there is some kind of intermediate, a transition between the old and the new species. Over time, these intermediates often go extinct because they're less adapted, but we can still find them in the fossil records. The famous Archaeopteryx was an intermediate form between reptiles and birds. It had teeth like reptiles, but also had feathers and probably could fly like birds. Tiktaalik was an intermediate between fish and four-limbed vertebrates living on land. Humans also evolved this way, but there are a few common misconceptions that we need to explain. For example, have you ever heard this idea that humans evolved from chimps? Well, we didn't, but let's start from the very beginning. Around 25 to 30 million years ago, apes diverged from our common ancestor with monkeys. Two lines were created. One became what today is known as the Old World monkey and includes, for example, macacas. The other line, apes, further branched off leading to gibbons, orangutans, and gorillas. Finally, around 6 million years ago, the remaining branch, called Hominini, divided into two. The genus Pan, including chimps and bonobos, and the genus Homo, including us, humans. So humans did not evolve from chimps. Instead, we both evolved from a common ancestor. Also, the human evolution itself doesn't end here. It's way more complex, and there are many different types of humans before the modern Homo sapiens sapiens, aka us. But that's a story for another episode. Now let's talk about three most common misconceptions about evolution. 1. Evolution is linear. Evolution is not linear. There is no specific goal or direction in which species evolve. Evolution has no end or perfect stage where it just stops. Instead, it's a constant trial and error and trying to survive in the constantly changing environment. Evolution takes place in response to the environment, rather than going into some specific direction on its own. Rather than a line, evolution creates a tree with a root in a very, very old organism. All other species evolved from this one common ancestor and then went into all kinds of different directions, all trying to survive and reproduce in a constantly changing environment. 2. Organisms are perfectly adapted. Evolution is not an engineer who sits there and thinks and plans all the adaptations in advance. Rather, adaptations are the product of tinkering, where we take what we have and we adapt it to whatever is needed at the moment. The results are not always perfect. Even if you look at the human body, sometimes stuff just doesn't make any sense. Our spine is not designed for the upright position. Our lower back is constantly under huge pressure and often gets damaged. No wonder that over 80% of adults suffer from lower back pain. The female pelvis is too narrow for our huge brains. That's why the labor is so painful, and still, our babies are born undeveloped, with a hole in the skull, cartilage instead of many bones, and being extremely fragile and not being able to survive on its own. A baby giraffe can run within hours after being born. For humans, it takes around a year to walk, and over 18 years to get a job, do your taxes, and survive on your own. Yeah, we are born not ready. Yeah. Because our brains grow so much, there is not enough space in our mouth for our wisdom teeth. They often cause pain and require surgery to be removed. As you can see, the human body is not perfect, but luckily for us, it doesn't have to be. It's just good enough to survive and reproduce, and that's the only thing that is important for the evolution of every species on Earth. Survive and reproduce. 3. Humans are the most evolved forms of life. There is this idea of humans being the pinnacle of evolution and simpler forms like bacteria being less evolved. Well, it makes sense to us. We want to think about ourselves as being special and the best. But are you sure you're better than other organisms? You're sure that they are more evolved? How do you even measure evolution? How do you measure the success of a species? Pyrococcus furiosus is an archaeon that can survive in extremely high temperatures reaching 100 Celsius degrees. We can barely make it through the summer without AC. Plants can live for hundreds of years, producing their own food using sunlight, whereas we are dead within a few weeks without food. You might say, well, at least we don't have natural predators. I mean, sure we don't, but as we could see over the last 2 years, a single virus can kill millions of us. So humans are not higher evolved than, say, chimps or cats or shrimps. We're just simply good enough in our environment, the same way other organisms are good enough in their environment. Today we explain most of the concepts on animals, but similar rules apply to plants, bacteria, and any other organism. All living creatures are the result of successful 3.5 billion years of evolution. Our ancestors were the best and the fittest of their times. They successfully survived and reproduced over many generations, fighting for limited resources. But you know what? They did it. They did it, so we all can be here today. Okay, that's it for today. Click here to see the previous episode and learn how drinking water can kill you, and click here for the next episode. And remember, stay curious.
Would you like to say something?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yo, that's pretty sick.